San Diego's mayor endorses a new energy program that features non-polluting power, what it might mean for San Diego consumers. Prop 6 lags in the polls this week, while a gas tax opponent mocks efforts to get more people out of cars and onto public transit. And Democrats are pinning some of their hopes for flipping the House on San Diego's 49th district race between Mike Levin and Diane Harkey. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, reporter Rob Nikolewski of the San Diego Union-Tribune, KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen, Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS, and Michael Smolens, columnist with the Union-Tribune. Well, San Diego may be the biggest city in California to take control over its sources of energy. Mayor Kevin Faulconer announced this week he will push to establish, that is, a CCA, or Community Choice Aggregation Plan. Let's get our obligatory, that's a terrible name, out of the way already. So, Rob, start with that, and we'll call it CCA from now on. How does it work?
Well, in the traditional utility model, the utility does everything: transmission and distribution, also the procurement of power, also the billing. Everything remains the same under a CCA plan except for one thing. The procuring of power is up to the local entity that establishes a community choice aggregation plan, a CCA. So that's the big difference. It's the only difference, but it's a big one.
Okay. And Andrew, what was the reasoning the mayor used in throwing his support to this?
Well, I think, we have the Climate Action Plan in San Diego. It really binds the city to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2035. And the mayor essentially had two options on the table at the end of the day. There was community choice, or there was this sort of alternative program that was proposed by SDG&E. An independent study kind of poked some holes in SDG&E's proposal, and the city wasn't really happy with it, so SDG&E withdrew its proposal, and community choice was really left as the only option that the mayor could potentially pursue. All
right, we're going to hear from the mayor here. We've got a bite on him explaining his whole reasoning.
This is what I've been saying for years about our Climate Action Plan. We can leave a cleaner city for the next generation and create economic benefits for our region. The two are not mutually exclusive.
All right, and what is, Rob, what are these going to mean to typical energy bills? Are they going to go up, down, stay the same?
That is the zillion-dollar question. The backers of CCAs say and point to other CCAs across California. There's about 19 of them right now. And they say that CCAs can provide not just procure cleaner sources of energy, but at very competitive, if not lower prices than the utilities. One major monkey wrench in this thing will be that a couple of weeks ago, the California Public Utilities Commission came out with a new formula for an exit fee. I don't want to get too far into the weeds in this, but when you establish a CCA, the customers of a CCA have to pay an exit fee to the legacy utility company. It's a very complicated formula, but the CPUC, the Utilities Commission, adjusted it upwards a couple of weeks ago. So each exit fee is different for each territory of an investor-owned utility. For the San Diego area, it's estimated by the CPUC that it'll come to about $4.25 cents, so 4.25 cents per kilowatt hour in San Diego. Mm-hmm. That works out, if you're, the general rule of thumb for how much a kilowatt hourage that a residence uses is about 400 kilowatt hours, 400 to 500 per month. So that works out to about $17 to $21.
And that's every month they're going to pay that?
That's every month.
Okay.
So that gives SDG&E some room, some wiggle room there to come up with something that might be more competitive than an eventual CCA.
So one of the main, I think, arguments that proponents of CCA talk about is this concept of choice. It's in the name, choice. Right now, SDG&E and many other utilities in California are essentially a monopoly. They're a regulated monopoly, but they don't have, a customer doesn't have really much choice to go to a competitor and say, well, maybe I can get a cheaper price here. So this idea of choice and competition, maybe trying to push the utility towards trimming some of the fat, the bureaucratic sort of fat that it's built up over the years. That's one of the things that supporters of the CCAs say is really great about these programs. Also, the fact that CCAs can actually set their own rates. Now, they're still overseen by the state regulators, but CCAs can choose, they hold their rate setting meetings in the local jurisdiction. So right now, our rates from SDG are decided up in San Francisco, where the Public Utilities Commission is headquartered. And if San Diego does establish a CCA program, those decisions will be made here, and that they say that increases transparency.
And as both of you and Rob noted in your stories this week, we have among the highest rates in the country. Allison?
Well, I have a question because, yes, supposing it turns out that, in fact, the consumer is not getting a lower rate and it's not such a good deal, the mayor did say that there would be a way to back out of it. But I wonder, how would the sustainable energy producers be able to invest in all the investments that they'd have to make to provide that energy if they don't have a solid commitment from the city of San Diego that, yes, we're going to stick with you?
Well, so most CCA programs automatically enroll all of the customers in that particular jurisdiction to start with, and that's just to kind of build up the customer base, and then the customers have the option of leaving the CCA program and sticking with the incumbent utility. I think we don't know exactly what the prices are going to be, but other CCAs have been paying these exit fees since the beginning, and they found ways to sort of mitigate. They build up some reserves. They, maybe find more favorable terms in energy procurement contracts than the utilities have been able to.
So it's an incentive to the sustainable energy producers to keep their prices low, or people could back out.
Certainly.
Michael?
Well, the question for either of you is that the mayor has, moved forward on this to set it up now. He's talking about more of a regional approach than just the city approach.
Yeah. Right.
Which the question I'm getting at is, will this take some time? And obviously there's going to be a lot that has to be done after he's termed out of the mayor's office in 2020. But what kind of responsibility does he have? Is this just sort of something that it's really backloaded, or is there heavy lifting for the mayor that he's really going to have to do over the next couple of years?
Sell this to a bunch of other communities.
Well, in order to put together a joint agreement, that's going to take about 3 years altogether. So that takes us a little bit beyond Mayor Faulkner's term. But a lot of the groundwork has to be laid. A vast majority of that groundwork has to be laid within the next 2 years. So I think that,
assuming the city council goes along with it.
And it's looking very, very likely, especially Lori Zaff came out in favor of it. So the backers of CCAs have counted the heads on this thing. They're very confident it's going to get done.
And right now, Solana Beach already has a CCA program that's up and running, and there are a number of other cities in the county that are in various stages of exploration or determining the feasibility of a program in their jurisdiction. So if the city decides to form a joint powers authority with Solana Beach and some other cities, then that could also create some economies of scale and sort of help streamline some of the administrative costs that would be associated with a
and not everybody's starting at square one.
Right. Exactly.
Short time left on this segment. I did want to get to the idea that San Diego has an aggressive climate action plan. The county has one too, but the state has a law that we've got to have all this green power here by, 2045?
2045.
Is that going to make CCAs moot in the years to come?
Well, I don't think so, and particularly in San Diego's case, because we have a tighter deadline. We have until 2035 to get to 100% renewable energy. And, the skeptics of CCA, mostly funded by the shareholders in Sempra Energy, SDG's parent company, point to this as, well, we already have the state law, but unfortunately the state law doesn't align with San Diego's own clean energy goals and the timeline.
All right, well, this will be certainly one to watch as we go forward here, and a lot of follow-ups to do in this story. Well, a most contentious proposition on November's ballot is Prop 6, repealing the state's recent hike in the gasoline tax and vehicle fees. Last year, the legislature passed a law raising the gas tax by 12 cents per gallon, first such increase since 1994. So what was, start with that, Andrew, what was the reason behind the increase and the jump in the vehicle fees?
Well, so I think the state legislature and really all Californians have observed the deterioration of our roads and some other points of infrastructure that are a little less visible, like the structural integrity of a bridge, let's say, And as you mentioned, the state gas tax had not been raised since 1994. So there are a couple things that have gone into this crumbling of our roads. One is inflation. So the gas tax is flat. It was never pegged to inflation. And so the purchasing power of all that revenue that we're collecting has been depleted over the years. Second, with population growth and our general trend towards more sprawling development, we have longer distances to travel by car and just overall more cars on the road. And then third, we also have seen a large number of hybrids and electric vehicles on the road, and they pay far less in gas taxes, but they essentially put the same stress on the roads and contribute the same amount to the degradation of infrastructure as conventional automobiles. So those three things are really the main reasons why the state legislature felt like it was time to raise the gas tax, and also vehicle fees.
All right, and this started in San Diego with Carl DeMaio. We've talked about that on the program before. But the increased spending from the gas tax revenues, which have been around now for a little bit, they've meant a lot to San Diego County specifically, right?
Yeah, so statewide it collects about a little over $5 billion a year. A lot of that is going to the state highway system. So the expansion of I-5 in North County with HOV lanes is getting, or it was promised rather, $195 million from the gas tax increase. A number of other highways are also getting drainage improvements to prevent flooding. Cities and counties are also getting an automatic return on this revenue, and most of them are using it for slurry sealing and other kinds of road repair. We should also mention public transit. Up to $800 million, I think, in the first 10 years is promised to public transit. And we're seeing some of those things come into San Diego as well, with zero-emission buses, more fuel-efficient coaster trains, and just overall increased operations and improvements to operations.
Well, I was just going to ask, as you know, and if you've written, Carl DeMaio has said that there's money there, they're just not spending it wisely. He, refutes the notion that this will be a real hit to the road repair flurry that's been going on. Mm-hmm. Is there truth to that, I guess, in terms of it's certainly a selling point, but do people buy that? Yeah, well, the gas tax collection and spending is really, really complicated, as it turns out. I tried to look into it. So it is true that some of the revenue from the state gas tax goes into things other than just road repair. A portion of it goes to the enforcement of traffic laws and funding the California Highway Patrol. So transportation related, but not necessarily related to the infrastructure alone. I think Carl DeMaio also has something of a problem with giving money from the gas tax to public transit. And then there are also administrative costs that the state's allowed to use gas tax revenue to kind of pay the salaries of people who run the whole program, and Carl has a problem with that as well.
The other thing that Carl DeMaio has been saying is that the state has plenty of money. It can find it somewhere else to do this. I mean, how many people do you really believe that the state of California has billions of dollars that it can pull out of its back pocket to backfill if this is taken away? Right.
Well, I think we should all also recognize that Carl DeMaio is something of an ideologue when it comes to taxes and government spending, and that's been true for a long time. So I think that he certainly sees that there's plenty of revenue on the table for the state to spend. But he also, says, well, and he fairly points out that California does have now the highest gas tax in the country. The cost of infrastructure repairs in California is higher than other states, and there are a lot of reasons that go into that, like the cost of living here and labor. But it is true, if you look at the gas tax overall, that flat % fee, we are paying more in California than other states.
we're going to talk in a minute about the 49th race, but Diane Harkey, the Republican in that race, has made the Prop 6 repeal a center plank of her platform. We got a bite from her on that caused a little stir. Let's hear that.
This is just fraud. It's forcing you to take bikes, get on trains, hose off at the depot, and try to get to work. Now that does not work. That does not work with my hair and heels. I cannot do that, and I will not do that.
Michael, I've been on trains, didn't really feel the need to hose off. I don't know what she means there, but isn't it easier politically just to say, tax, bad, pay too much for gas already. That's an easier argument than to try to keep this thing, isn't it?
Well, that's become sort of the meme of the campaign season so far, the hosing off, the hair and heels and hosing off at the depot. And I don't take public transportation regularly to work, but I have yet to have to hose off.
I've heard
anywhere. But yeah, I mean, what they were hoping is that Prop 6, in addition to hopefully, you know, from their side, reducing the gas tax, would help drive voters. Republicans like this. They're, you know, under, you know, kind of siege politically. Things aren't going their way. They may lose the House, they may not, but they were hoping that was going to spur voters. And whether it does or not, it doesn't really seem to be helping in races. Certainly not hers, as we'll talk about. You know, I mean, polls are showing her really lagging, and you know, has this made any difference at all? But they are banking on it as a populist motion. You know, some polls have been conflicting on it, but most of the legitimate ones have said, you know, it's trailing quite a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we had that discussion. Tell us about the polls, Andrew, and make the point you were about to make.
Well, you know, it depends on the question you ask in the poll. If you ask, do you want to repeal the gas tax or do you want cheaper gas? Of course, lots of people are going to say yes. The ballot title doesn't say repeal the gas tax, and there's some controversy over that as well, but it says, you know, repeal transportation revenues, and these are transportation revenues, of course, and that is something that a lot of voters may be a little bit more hesitant to support. I do want to bring back, though, one important point that I think is sometimes lost in the debate over Prop 6, which is climate change. California, we know now that transportation is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, and so there is no real tackling of climate change without shifting a huge number of people out of cars and toward biking, walking, and public transit. And so what I think we heard from Diane Harkey is that there's a lot of resistance to that in certain communities in California. We feel very wedded to our automobiles. We feel like it's our right to drive. But if we're really serious about tackling climate change, then we have to be okay with you know, efforts at the state level to try and encourage people to use greener forms of transportation.
And I have to say that I've heard Diane Harkey say you're appealing to the soccer moms in this world. Not everyone wants to take the bus to take their kids to soccer practice, but as someone who comes from Europe where the kids take the bus to soccer practice and you wouldn't have to be a soccer mom if you had public transit, you know, seems to escape a lot of people's notice.
Because they can get around on their own.
Yes.
Well, it's going to be very interesting. I know there's a lot of money weighing in and a lot of yard signs and ads and everything both ways. Another fascinating reason to vote on November 6th and to watch our coverage of the vote. And then we're going to move on to another political element today. Let's turn to the 49th Congressional District. Republican Darrell Issa decided not to run. That followed relentless weekly attacks by the Flip the 49th group. They made national news going after Issa. And Allison, the race to replace him because of that has kind of symbolic importance.
Well, it does. I mean, Darrell Issa gained a certain amount of notoriety during his term as head of the House Oversight Committee, and he went after Clinton over Benghazi, the Fast and Furious campaign. He basically went after the Democrats in a way that was so aggressive that some of his own colleagues in the Republican side of the House thought he was overstepping the line. So he had built up a certain amount of animosity that I think might have been part of the reason that the Flip the 49th came out, and he looked at the polls, looked at the registration, looked at the trends, and decided to step back.
All right, we got a peek at Diane Harkey in the previous segment, but start with her. Give us a little background, a thumbnail on Diane Harkey, the Republican.
Yeah, Diane Harkey has spent most of her life in banking. That was her profession. She served on the California State Assembly for a couple of terms, so she has held elected office and represented California. She represents 8 million Californians on the Board of Equalization, which is somewhat obscure board that deals with taxes. And so this relates to the fact that taxes, I think, is one of her main platforms, is to keep taxes low. She is not in favor of health care for all. She basically says that the wall is something that Donald Trump wants, but she's not particularly interested in the wall, but she is interested in comprehensive immigration reform. I think she would say that she takes a lot of the positions that the more established Republicans would take. And on climate change, she is definitely in the camp of the doubters as to whether man-made climate change is the cause of
in a stark contrast from her opponent, Democrat Mike Levin, in that race.
So Mike Levin is an environmental attorney, which I think has stood him in really good stead in this campaign. He also is from Orange County. They're both from Orange County. She lives in Dana Point. He lives in San Juan Capistrano. He has not held elected office, but he's been very involved with politics as the head of the Democratic Party up in Orange County. He has connections in Washington, D.C., which I think have helped him a lot in his campaign. Adam Schiff, House Intelligence Committee, who's also
very visible.
His neck of the woods, is very much in support of him. And he has run a lot on, being very aware of environmental issues. He's talked a lot about San Onofre, which people in his district are very much involved with. He is in favor of healthcare for all eventually. He says this is one of the moral issues of our time. And both of them, I would say, are talking about jobs and the fact that this district is one which on the coast there has a lot of very high-tech, a lot of good companies that pay really good wages in high-tech and biotech. So they're ahead of the game already in terms of jobs, in that I think this district is generating some very well-paid jobs for its residents.
Now, we've seen healthcare, Michael, play out a little bit in some of these congressional races around the country here. And what about here? Because Harkey and a lot of folks are saddled with the Republicans who have voted scores of times to repeal that provision and the risk provisions and the other protections that Obamacare still has in place.
Mike Levin has pointed that out, and even in her tenure up in Sacramento, there were certain votes that were counter to, I think, popular opinion in terms of expanding health coverage. It is an interesting dynamic. It's an issue that is hurting Republicans. How much it's resonating with all the other noise going on right now. I don't mean noise, but regarding immigration, the bombs being sent through the mail and so forth. There's a lot of things people are paying attention to. But you see, certain Republicans are really sort of quite frankly, adopting Democratic rhetoric in their campaign about pre-existing conditions, when some of these very people in Congress, not Diane Harkey, have voted against legislation
many
for
times.
pre-existing conditions. Excuse me. This is the party that has voted how many times against Obamacare, and we found that while initially Obamacare really wasn't very popular, it seemed like it sort of has grown, and people, now that it's been in, and that's become a big problem for Republicans, I think. But we had talked about, Allison had talked about the ISA factor and so forth. Trump played into this district an awful lot. It played into a lot about, the Democrats were very upset with ISA for his aggressive behavior towards Democrats, as she said, but also he really tied himself very closely to Trump, and that really backfired on him. And that had a lot to do, along with his votes on health care. That was sort of one of the real things that lit the fuse, in addition to all this stuff, that really drove him out of the race. And it's kind of interesting. He's endorsed Harkey. He's been kind of a high-profile supporter. That was probably an okay thing in the primary. I don't know that that's such a good political thing.
Not that
right
keen
now.
About that now, Allison.
Whereas, in fact, former President Obama came to town, and Bernie Sanders is due tonight. So the Democrats, I think, have been very mobilized by the fact that there's a connection between Obama and Levin. And one of the points that I wanted to make was perhaps that in the primary, the Republican who looked like he was going to win was Rocky Chavez, who was a much more moderate Republican, especially on climate change. I mean, I think he really recognizes that climate change is real, and he made some compromise votes in Sacramento based on the understanding that we have to cut down on greenhouse gases. And
important with so many constituents in California.
Yes, I mean, people along the coastline there are very aware of sea level rise, and so that's an issue that affects their property values, in fact. So in the end, it's hard to say whether the Republicans messed up by not voting in Rocky Chavez, because I think he was knocked out of the race by a Democratic ad. The Democrats realized he was by far the most threatening candidate and would be the hardest to beat. But it could have been a different race if Rocky Chavez had been
with
the
a climate change denier. What are the polls showing 10 days out from the election?
Well, the polls are showing that Levin is well ahead. Of course, Harkey's campaign is coming back and saying, look, these polls didn't take as many Republicans as Democrats. So I don't think it's a slam dunk. I don't think either side can sit back and say this is a done deal. But at the moment, Levin is quite substantially ahead in the polls.
All right, we've got a short time left here. You did touch on this a moment ago, and I wanted to get into politics this week. Frightening number of multiple crude bombs were sent to a number of Democratic leaders and outspoken Democrats like Robert De Niro and George Soros have an arrest today in this case. The federal authorities have announced. Michael, how do you think that is playing out, not just in California, but across the country as we get just in the last few days of this campaign?
Well, it's another head-snapping thing, very disconcerting, obviously. The more we find out about this person, the early indication is that he had a record, he's threatened people. He, comes sort of from the right-wing perspective, apparently. Again, it's all very early. Things will play out, but so that's going to play into the politics of this. Trump seemed to be trying to change the subject from various things we had been talking about, particularly health care and the environment, to immigration with this caravan coming up. I mean, he's sending troops to the border. He's got the Homeland Security Secretary out at the border today on Friday. So those things, he was hoping that's worked for him. This is going to at least give pause to that. And his initial take on it has been very kind of schizophrenic. He's talked about unity in one hand, we've got to stop this stuff, and all the things you would expect a president to say. And then he sort of has belittled it and called it this bomb thing, and he put quotes around the term bomb. So.
Yeah, and then even in the White House today, you've got a crowd there for him talking about this issue, saying CNN sucks and blasting the media and all. So we will see how it plays out. I think stay tuned. We've got another show before that. And of course, we encourage everybody to vote, and it's going to be a wild ride in the next 10 days. But we are out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Rob Nikolewski of the San Diego Union Tribune, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, Allison St. John, also of KPBS News, and Michael Smolens of the Union Tribune. And I urge you, go to kpbs.org, check out our comprehensive voter guide, and be sure to vote a week from Tuesday. That is coming right up. Hard to believe all the times we've talked about it on this show. It's going to be here. And I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.